Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast. You're listening to season 1, episode 9, hosted by me, Dani.
And me, Peter.
So what are we talking about today, Pete?
Today, Dani, we are talking about the power of getting started.
Oh, how fitting, given that today is our final episode of our very first season. Woo!
Oh, yeah, amazing. What an occasion.
So, what does it mean to get started?
Yeah, that we usually do talk about definitions to begin with, don't we, Dani? And in getting started, it does seem pretty obvious on the surface, getting started. For me, though, getting started, it's all about turning thought into action. I think that's getting started, or it's for me anyway. That's where some people might think that thinking is starting something, but turning thought into action. What about you?
Here's a question for you then. So our first episode, we recorded on the 13th of May.
Okay.
Was that the day we got started?
That's a good question. Was that the day we got started recording our first episode? Wow, why is that a difficult question to answer? Well, I think we got started before then. Maybe we got started a little bit before then when we had our first conversation about, well, I was going to say had our first conversation about recording a podcast. That was maybe pre-starting. I feel like we really got started when we committed to recording the first episode, and by doing that, by making that commitment, it made us think about and plan out the podcast first series. And I think maybe that's it. So talking about doing a podcast, not quite getting started, starting recording the podcast, already started, making the commitment and planning out. What's that starting? What do you think? Where did it start for you?
The reason that I asked that is because there's in a couple of episodes we talked about how you've imagination, creativity, and innovation, and we've been saying that innovation is the practical application of something. And similarly, I've been toying around with when is the beginning of something, because I think you and I started talking about this idea of a podcast. I want to say it was around January.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't record our first episode till May. But in that, between January and May, we were having regular conversations about the podcast and what we would talk about and how we would do it. And so I struggled so was that kind of like that imagination stage, right? Where we were just kind of thinking and exploring, how might we do this? What might we do?
Mm-hmm.
And was the getting started moment really when we sat down on the 13th of May to go, okay, let's hit that record button. But we couldn't get to the record button had we not done all that talking and planning.
That's true. I was about to change my my answer to your question about when was getting started, and that it was when we pressed record on that first episode. But maybe it wasn't then. Maybe it was when we listened to the first episode. No, not as. It seems like or certainly my assumption that there was a simple answer to what is getting started. Maybe, in this case, maybe it's not. Yeah.
There are no simple answers, Pete.
maybe by now, episode 9, people who might have listened to some episodes, they're starting to realize that this podcast hopefully generates more questions than answers. If they come to a podcast looking for answers, I don't know, they can tell us what they think, but there's no simple answers. But maybe is our definition good enough? Do you think our definition of, let's say yours is when we press record for the sake of the podcast and the conversation. Let's say mine is when we committed to recording an episode and booked in our diaries on the 13th of May. Did you say that was when we got started? What if we go with those two? Maybe we'll come back to them as we continue this conversation. Why though? So using our kind of structure that we're developing, why is, and this sounds really obvious again, like the definition question, but maybe it's not. Why is getting started important? Or maybe if you want, you can take and explore what is the power of getting started.
I actually think the answer to both of those questions is the same.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I think that the power of getting started, and this is also why I wanted to kind of explore when did we get started, is so other than being avid podcast listeners, that was kind of the extent of our podcasting experience. Like, this is not something we knew anything about. And all we started with this was with this topic that we both are quite passionate about. And Pete and I used to meet once a week to have conversations about design and design thinking and what we were working on and how, how we were using design thinking. And then one day, like, we just started going, we really should start recording these because they're so insightful that it might be helpful for us to go back and listen and, then we'll get some more insights. And then that turned into, hey, what if we recorded it and shared it with other people? And then that turned into, hey, let's do a podcast. And that turned into, well, we can't just record ourselves rambling for an hour. We need to have some structure and we need to kind of have some topics and we need to frame it up a little bit, but still keep it, in our authentic conversational kind of style. So that's kind of how this podcast evolved. And I think the power of getting started is that you kind of need that first step to build the momentum for the second step, to build the momentum to the, third step. And I believe, and then, even when we pressed record for that first time, there were so many things we didn't know. Like, we didn't know, like, how do we put our podcast on a platform? How do we, I didn't even know how to take a Zoom recording and turn it into a MP3 file. This also speaks to the power of Google and YouTube videos. But the thing is that, we recorded the first episode and then we're like, okay, well, we got to now figure out how to do the next thing. And then we did the next thing and we have to figure out how to do the next thing. And I think that's the power of starting. Because had we waited to figure all of those things out, we would still be figuring those things out.
Yeah. Okay.
And like, I think the power of starting is it creates momentum, but it also creates this sense of urgency, right? Because it was like, well, if we spent this hour recording this thing and we don't do anything with it, then what's the point? And then, so it kind of helps like put a little bit of fire in you.
Yeah. Nice. We've not said this for a while, but we don't always agree. We don't always agree. And sometimes we've got slightly different ways of looking at things, which is hopefully one of the things that people might find helpful or enjoyable about this podcast. I do agree with everything you've just said, but I see it slightly differently. And something just crystallized in my mind when you were talking there, and it's going to give us maybe one of our Google moments for this podcast. And that is, as you described, I think of them as learning that you can't learn anything unless you get started. That's one slightly different way of describing what you said. And the lessons we've learned, like as you described, like lesson 1 and then lesson 2, and them all gathering together. In my mind, there was a visual image of a YouTube video, and I'm gonna Google what it's called and who it's by, but the YouTube video is all about the power not of starting but of the first follower. Have you seen this one, Dani? So
no, I haven't.
Right. Okay. So I'm gonna Google this and then see what it says. So if you and listeners can Google first follower, and yeah, brings up the first result is a YouTube video by a guy called Derek Sivers, and if you watch that, it's Derek Sivers kind of analysing this one person dancing at a festival, and they're dancing by themselves. And the spoiler alert, if you want to go and watch it, go watch it and then come back. But what happens is there's a guy who looks like he's pretty brave and out there dancing by himself, and he's kind of just hoping, I guess, that other people come and join him. Eventually one person does come and join him, and that's the first follower, the person who joined this guy in this grassy field dancing. That's like us getting started. And then slowly but surely other people join, and that's all of our lessons joining together. But none of them would have, and eventually there's more people dancing than there are sitting around watching, and then eventually everybody joins in. Our idea to do a podcast was the guy dancing by himself, and then his first follower is the equivalent of us doing our first podcast. What I think the similarities are, for me anyway, the power of getting started is in the lessons you learn, and again, it sounds obvious when you say it, but you can't learn anything unless you do something. You have to start to learn. But also overcoming fears. Like, I don't know about you, Dani, but one of the reasons I was really enthusiastic and always been interested in what it's like to record a podcast, but several things have kind of held me back from actually carrying out. One of them, probably the first one being, like I think almost every human being, you don't necessarily like the sound of your own voice, but in order to record a podcast and do a better podcast, each podcast episode, you need to listen to yourself and get used to the sound of your voice as other people hear it. And I think of that, and we've talked a lot about it. That was like our hurdle number 1 to overcome. We couldn't do that unless we started. So we started recording the podcasts, and kept going. So summarizing, power of starting is, for me, because that's the only way you get to learn, and 2, it's the only way actually overcome or deal with any fears you've had. Check out that video over on Derek Sivers. It's called First Follower Leadership Lessons from Dancing Guy. It's a good video.
Love that. I've written that down so I can go listen to it, watch it after. I think so same with me. Like, I hate the sound of my own voice, and I remember after we recorded that first episode, I listened to it. I think I listened to it about 3 times, and it almost felt like some sort of desensitizing exercise. I also, and I think the power of starting is also in that we needed something, right? Because like, we could have gone out there and told people, oh, we're going to start a podcast, and this is what we're going to talk about, and what do you think? And it's all theoretical. And, we were either going to hear one of two things. Oh, that sounds great. Or, well, there's so many podcasts out there. Why, what's going to make, like, why would somebody listen to you? Those are basically the two things that people could say.
Yeah.
But when you actually created it, like, one of the things that's been really, that's really amazed me is, so season 1, Peter and I have just, we've created this as a prototype. And I think we've talked about that throughout the season, how this is our prototype. So as we've been recording, we've been sharing with, friends, family, colleagues, people that have an interest in this topic. And it's been really cool to be able to get feedback. And, in the first couple of episodes, we would send it out, we would ask for feedback, and then before we record the next one, we'd go, okay, what are we going to do differently now based on the feedback we've heard? And so from episode 1 to episode 9, there's been tweaks along the way. And that would have never happened had we not gotten started, because people can't give you feedback on a theoretical concept, or, if something's just an abstract concept, it's hard for people to give you feedback.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Brett, I might have mentioned this before, and it's just popped back into my head. There's a really great quote that I like to kind of bring to mind and pay attention to and act upon as much as possible. Don't get ready, get started. And the first time I heard it was spoken by a guy called Perry Claiborne, who's from the Stanford D School. Don't get ready, get started. And it's maybe, sorry, to come back to our definitions of getting started. Maybe I'm settling towards, you're right, getting started was hitting record on the first episode. Everything up to that point was getting ready. But I think in that, from what Perry Claiborne says about don't get ready, get started, he's, in those 4 words, he's kind of really incisively getting to what holds a lot of people, teams, organizations back. They spend a lot of time planning something out, and often the planning is kind of a displacement activity for the fear. And maybe, that was what's happening. That's why, there was nothing to stop us back in January going, let's record a podcast, and actually, nothing physically stopping us, starting to record a podcast in January. We could have done it then, but we spent a little bit extra time getting ready. Whereas he would have, that quote suggests that actually, just get just as ready as you need to be, and no more, no less, and then get started.
I love that, because I do think, I think there is an importance to getting ready, but I think what happens is we get so caught up, like we end up stuck in like a perpetual state of getting ready. So I think part of, like, the challenge is really, how do you know if you're ready enough? And I think that's the thing that gets us caught up. So I think maybe what we need to talk about is, like, what were a couple of the things that we put into place that made it feel like, okay, let's just go do this thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Just testing my my memory. Well, I think I mentioned one of them. We kind of booked a date to do it. We kind of made a commitment to each other to go, right, we're going to do this. We're going to record an episode. You put it in our diaries. We put the time in there. I think we mapped out some conversations to have. So what's some conversation topics? What else did we do? I guess those two things are probably, that's telling that those two things come to mind. Maybe that's what all I really needed, was to commit to a time and date know that we were doing it together and have something to talk about. There was maybe, I guess, maybe to share with the audience a little bit of, like you've mentioned it, like why would people? There's the question mark, probably still is, why do people want to, or why might people listen to us, and how is it going to help them by listening to us? That to me is a confidence thing. Yeah, what about you? What are the things that we start to put in place that, I guess maybe it's the point of no return? When did we go beyond the point of no return?
I think the point of no return probably was when we recorded our first episode and we started telling some people we knew about it.
Yeah.
Because then it was like, well, we've done one episode. Right. So I think there is a little bit of power in sharing what you're doing, because it right. But I also think for me, I'm a big, so similar to you, kind of making that commitment. I'm putting something in the calendar and saying, this is our record time, and every week we're going to get together and do this. And I think that part was kind of easy for us because you and I always had an hour in our calendars every day to meet, every week to meet anyway. But the other thing that made it safe was I said to myself, let's record it. And I think we said this to each other, let's record it. And then we'll listen to it. And if it's terrible, we'll delete it.
Yep. I remember that. Yeah.
And then, we both listened to it and like, there's some good stuff in there. So I think sometimes to get started, you need, I think you just need to tell yourself, like, this can be a complete screw up and it's okay. Like, like give yourself permission to not have it turn out well.
Yeah, nice. And a couple of things you've reminded me of. One of them is we agreed that we would frame it as, and it's a prototype. It's our prototype Design Thinker podcast. Season 1 is a prototype. Season 2 will be a slightly more iterated prototype. Phil Gilbert, who's I think he's just left or retired from IBM. He was IBM's global head of design. You can YouTube a video of his called Everything. It's either Everything or Every Day is a prototype, and he describes that unique. He came across design because his organization was, I think, acquired by IBM, a number of decades ago, and he started to dig into it and realized that, when you think about it, every day of your life you can treat as a prototype. And for me, design and design thinking, one of those core principles of prototyping things can help alleviate the need for perfect, and definitely help get started. So I remember now I'm kind of feeling it in my body. As soon as we agreed and talked about this being a prototype, then a lot of the fear and anxiety about everything we've just talked about disappeared, because if you frame things up as a prototype, as a design thinker, then the only purpose of early prototypes is to learn something. And like you said, our first episode, I think it was pretty good, and we learned stuff from it. Even if it had been a complete disaster, what we would have learned heaps from it, maybe even more. Prototyping and that perfectionism as well.
Yeah, I think another thing to call out is I think we were both on a bit of a high after episode 1. And then I remember we recorded episode 2 and we were like, oh.
Yeah. Good memory. Yeah, that was a bit of a bounce back, wasn't it?
It was. And I think both of us toyed with the idea of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't put that one out there. But I don't think we vocalized it, but I think we both had that thought.
Mhm.
But we wanted to lean into, we wanted to lean into trusting our process, right? So as design thinkers, we know that part of creating a prototype and testing is to keep going. And I think sometimes when initially a prototype is successful, you kind of have this high, and then you keep going, and then you're going to get some feedback or something that goes where you start to kind of see the flaws in what you're making. And then you might start to feel deflated, but you have to trust the process and keep leaning into it and keep opening yourself up to the feedback and keep telling yourself it's okay if it's not perfect. And I think that that's equally important as getting started. Like, it's an important element of getting started is actually staying started.
Keeping going.
There you go. Keep going.
Yeah, well, maybe that's episode 1 of season 2 is the power of keeping going. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And I would just like to say thanks to everyone who gave us feedback, especially after that first episode. There was a select bunch of people, and that for me anyway, getting feedback on everything, both stuff that they felt we could have done a lot better or just a little bit better, as well as stuff that really resonated. To really heartfelt gratitude to everybody who gave us feedback, because for me that helped me go, I'm going to do another one and see what happens. And yeah, nice memory, Danny, that episode 2 was let's call it a different energy. I think also what we did, so maybe just delving into the kind of prototyping and testing aspect of design and listening to feedback, but not necessarily always taking action on it. Some of the feedback we got was the length of the first podcast, and some people said 40 minutes is maybe a little bit too long. So I think the next 1 or 2 we tried to go shorter, and what we learned was that kind of made things a bit more artificial for us, energy wise and conversation wise. And then when we came back to later episodes being around 40 minutes, it seems to be our natural conversation length that felt more comfortable for us. That's just an example of, listen to all the feedback, gather it, but and do something with it, but also be open to not doing something with it or disregarding it or keeping it for a later time.
Or in this case, like we tried it and realized actually, that was good feedback. It gave us an opportunity to test something new. And we came to the conclusion that actually the way we were doing it before was better.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes with prototyping, you might need to go back to your original idea.
Yeah. Sorry, you go.
No, that was it.
Oh, nice. What I was going to say was that I think just to maybe share with people a couple of our other. They're almost, as I'm thinking about it, they're almost each of them is getting started again, or maybe it's keeping going. Like there's been a few kind of are they hurdles or just I'll call them hurdles, because we've taken a deep breath and pressed go on the next stage a couple of times, haven't we? So we've done recording it, sharing it with some amazing people who gave us feedback in the first couple of episodes, continuing to share it, continuing to get feedback. But then for you, what was the next kind of hurdle to overcome?
The next one was when we put it on Apple Podcast. Because we were no longer, up until then, we kind of controlled who we sent the episode to. And once we put it on Apple Podcast, then it's like, well, now anybody anywhere can listen to it, and we have no control over that. So that was for me, that was the next one.
Yeah. I guess the power of doing that is we just opened up the potential lessons learned from feedback from a handful of people to it's a scary number of potential listeners, isn't it? But well, I said scary subconsciously. It's a scary, but also an incredibly exciting, energizing potential number of listeners, which we'll hopefully start hearing from as the podcast gets more widely known. Okay, so there's that, and then I shared that as a hurdle.
But then there was kind of a part 2 to that hurdle, right? Because then we did that, and then we got feedback. Well, what about Spotify? And then so that was kind of like part 2 of that hurdle. So it was one of those hurdles where you thought you jumped the hurdle, but then you realize actually no, there's a little bit more of a jump. So I think that was the second part, and it was kind of a like, okay, now we're on 2 platforms, so
even more people to listen. And then I can't think of any since then. What are we about to do next? What's our upcoming?
Well, I think the hurdle that you and I have been talking about that neither one of us has even attempted to jump on is kind of promoting the podcast. So, we've built the prototype, we've iterated it. This is the 9th episode we're recording. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, but we haven't really gone out on social media and really. So at this stage, if you find our podcast, it's either because we've messaged you and told you, or you blindly stumbled upon it while you were looking for a podcast, but we haven't proactively been promoting it. So I think that's the hurdle that.
That's our next one.
So now we're going back to the power of starting.
Power of starting. I'm slightly nervous, but also quite excited about that. I think we're ready for that, aren't we, Dani? We're ready to publicize and open ourselves to even broader and richer feedback. Nice. Well, I think we've talked about definitions. I think we're starting to help people understand why it's important. Might seem obvious, but why it's important to get started, and how to get started.
Which we kind of touched on a little bit, right? Because we had talked about kind of how to get started. One was to make the commitment, put it in the calendar, because I think there is a lot of power to having that time devoted to it. Like, I think if you don't schedule it, it doesn't get done, and that was very powerful in this one. I think giving ourselves permission to fail. Nice. Adopting this as a prototype and kind of being very open and transparent. Like, we have this idea, we want to see if it works. We'd love your feedback. Because again, that gave us permission to fail. I think being mindful of getting ready, like I think being mindful of sort of being ready, right? Ready enough, maybe.
Ready enough.
Ready enough.
Yeah.
And knowing and being okay with not knowing it all before you do it. And I think that's a struggle, because I think for most of our lives, like, we're taught to learn and then do. Like, I mean, if you think about this concept of education, right? We spend all these years in school so we can learn how to do something, and then we go out into the world and do it. So I think but that's ingrained in us that until we know how to do something, we shouldn't do it. And certainly there are things that apply to, like, please don't go try to do open heart surgery without learning how to do it. But there's lots of things in life that we can and almost have to figure out as we're doing it.
Yeah, that's Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that.
And actually, you know what, even with open heart surgery, and I am no surgeon, until, you know, and I know that, you know, you don't just go out and do this yourself, and there's a lot of training that goes into it. But I think for you to become a really good surgeon, that actually happens when you start doing it.
Yeah. When you actually start doing it. Yeah. Yeah.
But you do have to have some background in it. So I don't want to set people up to go try to.
No, likewise.
Try to be surgeons. Yeah.
Likewise, you know, skydiving. Talked about it a couple of times. You know, there's a phrase in the skydiving world that you know you can't learn to skydive on the internet, and that would apply to many things these days. Like people get curious and sit at home and ask questions, and you know, that's building knowledge, but it's not learning how to do it. But like similarly to you know, brain surgery, heart surgery, you need to learn some basics, but the real learning comes by doing it. And I think definitely the same thing applies to designing and design thinking. And maybe kind of starting to wrap us up, Dani. For me, learning how to podcast by actually doing a podcast.
And I think that's so in line with what design thinking is, right? And you and I have sometimes debated about, should it actually be called thinking? Yeah, I think for me, kind of thinking back, it is the process of learning by doing. And I think it's also like what I'm taking away with it from this first season is being open to the possibilities of what can happen if you give yourself permission to fail.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm taking away as well. It's resonating really strongly. Taking away from the whole of the first season. Well, yeah, it's definitely the power of getting started. Sorry to be self-referential to the episode, but yeah, we're gonna end up on an agreement and just a copycat. It is, like you said, giving yourself permission to fail. Maybe frame slightly differently as treat everything like a prototype and don't get ready, get started. That's what I'm taking away. Although I did laugh that there's a close tie with your phrasing of learn then do is how things go at school, but I think in real life learning by doing is far more effective and more natural.
And I think it's also like practically needed.
Yeah. It's a necessity to be doing that. Nice.
So I think that is it. The final episode of season 1. To all of our listeners, thank you. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love if you enjoy our podcast, subscribe and leave us a review. So we will be taking a little bit of a break, and while we do a little planning, not too much, on what season could look like. And we look forward to coming back to you with Prototype 2.0 in season 2.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening.